What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is the LazyDaze Channel, and we're back at it again with some more history reaction for you guys today. And we're back on some extra credits, extra history content for you, and it's the history of England part 3, the devastation of France. We're really enjoying this series over here and finding out how Extra Credits is doing their version of this story and finding out the different details in this. We really enjoy their content over here, so if you haven't already, head over to their page. A link will be in the description box down below. If you guys are enjoying our content, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But we are just going to jump straight into this one.
Let's do this! My tism gets weirder and weirder.
More apparent is what I would say.
At the end of the Battle of Crécy, Edward was finally able to greet the Black Prince, his son. "You are indeed my son, you have proved yourself worthy to rule a land," he said. In the Middle Ages, pillaging and murdering your way across northern France was clearly considered an appropriate father-son bonding opportunity. Edward marched north to besiege the impregnable coastal fortress of Calais. His captain, Walter Manny, escaped French jail and joined the fight. Edward didn't have the men to capture Paris and the French crown, but Calais was a prize worth fighting for. For month after month, Calais resisted and hoped that King Philip would come. They ran out of bread, so they ate the horses. They ran out of horses, so they ate the dogs. In desperation, they expelled 500 of the old and infirm, but in line with the rules of medieval warfare, Edward would not let them come through his lines to escape or feed them. And so there, in sight of their own families, 500 men, women and children starved to death. And then they ran out of dogs. When even the rats looked scrawny, Calais gave up hope. Now, Edward didn't want to slaughter the inhabitants of Calais, but they'd resisted his will. They'd defied him. So Edward prepared a piece of theatre. He sat waiting in a fine pavilion as 6 leading townsmen walked from the gates of Calais to beg for mercy. Gone were their fine clothes and jewellery. They were barefoot in rags with ropes round their neck. They threw themselves at Edward's feet and begged for their lives and the lives of their fellow citizens. But Edward would not be moved. All must die. But then his own queen, Philippa, threw herself at her husband's feet in tears and begged for their lives. And finally, Edward relented.
What one is she shagging?
Here was the role of the medieval queen, to intervene so that the king could show mercy or generosity without losing face or appearing weak. England would keep Calais for 200 years.
One of them.
No, not at all. So basically, he didn't want to kill all of them, but he had to kill all of them because they resisted.
Yeah.
By doing this public display, it made him like save face for not killing them, type of thing. Because he wants the money from them. You know, he wants them to be alive.
Tax money.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be described by the French as a dagger aimed at the heart of France. Edward went home victorious to England and proceeded to party, big time. But while he parted, England received a tiny visitor, a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which had travelled all the way from the Russian steppes. Yersinia lived in the guts of a flea. The flea lived on the black rat. The black rat loved the thatch and wooden beams of medieval houses and travelled the seas in merchant ships. Yersinia was not friendly. In fact, Yersinia was utterly lethal. When an infected flea bit a human, Yersinia spread into the human's lymph nodes and destroyed the immune system. As the body struggled to survive, obscene black buboes burst from under the skin, and so it would become known as the Black Death. Its speed was horrific. You might feel fine in the morning, a bit peaky at lunchtime, and be as dead as a nail by tea time. 45% of English men and English women died. England's population plummeted to 2 million. Europe's population fell by between 30 and 50%. The impact of the Black Death was profound and long-lived. Prices fell. Suddenly there were no labourers around, so lowly, wage-earning peasants had more power and freedom than they'd ever had. A lower population meant less men and material for war. Medieval man had no way to understand what had just happened to it, either economically or biologically. For them, this could only be the will of God. Edward decided that it was his duty to carry on as before. Medieval society was deeply conservative. It was the job of a king to protect his people, to make war, to enrich his followers and raise the reputation of his kingdom by celebrating his magnificence. Edward was good at glory. It was a personal talent. In 1352, he famously created the Knights of the Garter, a chivalric order of 24 knights that still exists today. Its patron saint was St. George, and in time the saint and his red cross would be the patron saint of all England. Meanwhile, in France, the war became almost a private war. English captains raised companies of fighting men, archers, men-at-arms, pikemen, and went to France to win their fortune. These companies of men were called the Free Companies, and France was swamped by English free companies. So when Philip died and his son John became king, optimism swept across France. Handsome and brave, the new king was called John le Bel. Surely he would crush the English. John even created his own order of chivalry, the Order of the Star, to rival Edward's Order of the Garter. A little more dignified than a piece of underwear. Edward's son and heir, the Black Prince, had other ideas. In 1355, he set out on what became known to history as the Great Chevauchée, burning and pillaging through southern France, seemingly at will, unstoppable, with utter brutality, death and disease trailing in his wake. John le Bel's reputation already lay in ruins, and in the next campaigning season he would have to fight. And so in 1356, the English planned a grand campaign. Henry of Lancaster would invade from the north of France and strike south. The Black Prince and the Captal de Buch would march from Gascony northwards to meet him. But this time, King John trumped them both. He appeared with an army that dwarfed either Lancaster or the Black Prince and cut them off from each other. Now at this point, the Black Prince made like brave Sir Robin and bravely turned his tail and fled. But near the town of Poitiers, out of food, out of water, he was caught. If John had just waited, the English may have had to surrender. They were hungry, tired and thirsty, and miles from the nearest pizza delivery area. But if it was arrogance that made Philip fight at Crécy, John had no choice. For the future of his kingship, he needed to make these English bandits pay, and with double their numbers, a complete victory seemed assured. The French had learned lessons from Crécy. At Poitiers, their main attack was on foot. Hand to hand, the opposing knights hacked at each other, and slowly the smaller English army was forced back, and they were in danger of annihilation. But the Black Prince was his father's son. When all around was chaos, he found a small mounted force under the Captal de Buch and sent them to swing wide round the battlefield and appear in John's rear. And then over the screams and din of battle, he gathered some men together, told them to mount, and cried, "Advance in the name of God and St. George!" The French were shattered into pieces, to small, isolated groups of men, and the slaughter began. The slaughter was not for knights and nobles. No self-respecting soldier in the Middle Ages would be daft enough to kill a knight. The common soldiers and archers fine, no one cared about them, their job was to die. But killing a knight was against the rules of chivalry and good finance. Rather, you took the knight captive, the knight promised to honour any agreement and not to run away, you agreed a ransom, and then he was sent off to collect it for you. Simple as that. Throughout the 100 Years' War, the French and English nobility remained friends. They took part in tournaments, exchanged gifts, shared poetry, and married. War was a game in which the death of a noble was to be deeply regretted. And in the crush and chaos at Poitiers, there was one pair that everyone made sure not to kill. A knight in magnificent armour with his 14-year-old son at his side. The father was John le Bel, King of France. The boy was Philip, one day to be Duke of Burgundy. And amazingly, the English had captured the King of France himself. Within a few months, the captured king was the guest of honour at a season of tournaments and pageants in London, bedecked with flags and colour as England celebrated its humiliation. The following years ahead were some of the worst in French history. The medieval state could hardly function without a king, and France collapsed. English free companies descended like locusts on her corpse and feasted, burning, stealing, raping. Here is just one quote by a Frenchman. "The loss by fire of my village where I was born is to be wept for. The vines in this region were not pruned or kept from rotting. The fields were not sown or ploughed. There were no cattle or fowl in the field. No lambs or calves bleated after their mothers. The pleasant sound of bells was heard, not as a summons to divine worship, but as a warning of hostile intentions." And so John agreed to a treaty. He had no choice. The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 gave away most of southwestern France and a massive king's ransom. France was on the edge, but that ransom was never paid, for John died in captivity in 1364, and the tide was about to turn.
Well, I'm looking forward to finding out what happens in the next episode.
I do enjoy the extra little bits.
Yeah, I really enjoy the anime style. It's a bit more sort of eased off. It's a lot more funny. I really enjoyed this episode. And again, just finding out the different parts and the different way they explained it. If you guys enjoyed that, then like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we will catch you in the next video.
See you in the next one.